Someone was breathing in my closet. That's how I knew I had to run. But let me start from the beginning, because what happened in that Oregon cabin will haunt me forever. I was driving from northern Oregon to central Arizona for a family reunion right after New Year's. Needed a quick overnight stop, so I found the cheapest place in eastern Oregon, deep in the pines, isolated, but only a mile off the interstate. Perfect for one night. As the sun disappeared behind endless black trees, I turned onto an unmarked gravel path. No signs, no lights, just my headlights cutting through darkness. The cabin appeared massive, way bigger than the one-bedroom retreat advertised online. Strange there were no exterior photos, but I shrugged it off. I parked and grabbed my bag when the door suddenly flew open. A man beamed at me with a grin too wide, voice dripping fake sweetness. Heart pounding, I stammered who he was. "Name's Victor, your host," he said. "Room's this way." Wait, room? This wasn't the whole cabin. The ad said standalone. Maybe I misread under pressure. I followed him down a pitch-black hallway with no lights, just shadows clinging to walls. He handed me keys and flashed that unsettling smile before disappearing. I locked my door immediately. Something felt wrong. His friendliness seemed rehearsed, almost robotic. I stayed in my room 30 minutes, listening. Eventually heard muffled TV sounds from the living room, so I relaxed enough to shower. The old tub was disgusting, but the semi-transparent curtain looked new. Water running, I heard a thump from the hallway. Through the blurry curtain, I swear I saw a shadow move in my bedroom. I yanked the curtain open but saw nothing. Finishing quickly, I stepped out and my blood ran cold. The bedroom door was cracked open. I had locked it. Someone had been inside while I showered, watching me through that see-through curtain. I slammed the door shut, relocking it with trembling hands. Grabbing my phone, I checked the listing reviews. Only 3 5-star reviews that looked completely fake. Worse yet, the ad clearly stated standalone cabin, not shared space. I hadn't made a mistake at all. Packing frantically, I pressed my ear to the door, listening for Victor's location. TV still played near the front entrance. But then I heard something else, something that made my skin crawl. Soft, raspy breathing coming from inside my room, from the closet. I threw the door open and sprinted past the empty living room to my car, drove dangerously fast down that rugged path until I hit the highway, called police from the next town. They investigated but couldn't prove Victor's disturbing behavior. Only got him for false advertising on the rental platform. And here's the kicker, Victor wasn't even his real name. The listing vanished permanently, hopefully sparing others from that nightmare. I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't heard that breathing. If I had stayed asleep, trusting that fake smile and syrupy voice. Some questions are better left unanswered. But my story isn't over. Because 2 years later, I learned something that changed everything about that night. Something that made me realize just how close I came to becoming another missing person statistic in those Oregon woods. This next tale takes us deeper into the wilderness, where curiosity becomes a deadly mistake. I rented a cabin in the Colorado Rockies 2 weeks after Christmas, wanting a stress-free vacation. 24 years old, burned out from work, I needed complete isolation. Got a great off-season deal on a place so remote that silence became my only companion. The cabin matched the photos exactly. Simple, slightly worn, but cozy. I unpacked slowly, made dinner, read by the fireplace. Nothing happened that first night, just peaceful sleep and a refreshing morning. After breakfast and coffee, boredom crept in. I noticed a rough map by the front door showing a trail behind the cabin. Owner's description promised a simple 2-mile walking path through the woods. Perfect afternoon activity. The trail was clearly abandoned, overgrown, and barely visible. Owner must have carved it years ago, then forgotten about it. According to the map, just one loop through the forest. But halfway down, I discovered something not marked anywhere. Another path split from the main trail. Curiosity won over caution. I had nothing better to do anyway. For 5 minutes, I saw nothing special. Then I pushed through thick brush and found what lay at the end. Another cabin, ancient and rotting. Moss covered the sides, wood dilapidated beyond repair, clearly abandoned for decades. The creepiest looking structure I'd ever seen, sitting in the middle of nowhere, uncomfortably close to my rental. Close enough that whoever built it couldn't have thought they were alone out here. I approached the doorless entrance and peered inside. Same decay as outside, smelling of rot and mildew. Dust coated everything. But one detail stood out. Fresh footprints in the dust. Scuff marks on the wooden floor that hadn't faded. Someone had been here recently. Maybe another renter found this place, I thought. But then something shifted in my peripheral vision. A black doorway led to a room without windows or light. Pure darkness beyond that threshold. I was absolutely certain something moved in that void. Panic hit hard. I ran back to the trail, moving quickly until I reached the rental cabin. Locked myself inside, heart racing. That gut feeling, indescribable but powerful, told me something terrible had happened in that abandoned place, or was still happening. I texted the owner about the old cabin I'd found, hoping for reassurance that it was just forgotten property. His response came an hour later, strange and unsettling. Just one sentence. There are no other cabins nearby in the woods. What did he mean? I literally just told him I found a cabin back there. Was he gaslighting me? Didn't want me knowing about that place? I didn't respond. Over the afternoon and evening, I managed to calm down. Convinced myself it was just an abandoned, vacant structure. Nothing more. Made dinner, had drinks, sat by the fireplace until around midnight. Then that awful feeling returned. Sudden, overwhelming dread tightened my stomach. I sat up, looking around the dark, quiet cabin. Got up and checked the window. The woods were dead silent. No movement, no sounds. Even the trees stood perfectly still. That unnatural calm was more unsettling than any noise would have been. I stared at the dark trail entrance behind the cabin, feeling paranoid for the first time in my life. After 5 minutes of watching, I heard something. Leaves crunching, sticks snapping right outside. Someone was walking around my cabin. I followed the sounds toward the front door, heard footsteps climb onto the porch, and stop directly outside. Complete silence for 30 seconds. Instead of calling police immediately, I texted the owner, asking if he knew who was outside and if someone was supposed to be here. As soon as I sent the text, a phone chimed right outside the front door. My dread intensified. The owner was out there, but why? Why didn't he text first? Why was he just standing there in the darkness? This connected to that abandoned cabin somehow. I knew it. Even after hearing his phone, he didn't text back. I dialed 911. Minutes passed in eerie silence, knowing he remained outside that door. My biggest fear was that he had keys and could enter any time. But for some reason, he didn't, like he was debating whether to do something terrible. Eventually, I heard movement on the porch, then quiet until police arrived. Officers went to the owner's main address. He wasn't there, didn't answer the door or phone. Made sense if he was still walking through those woods, unable to get far on foot. When they finally reached him days later, he denied everything. Claimed he wasn't at the cabin, didn't know what I was talking about. Officers agreed it was suspicious, like he was hiding something about that abandoned place. But without evidence or search warrant, they couldn't investigate further. I never learned what was really happening out there. Maybe I shouldn't have explored beyond the marked trail. But I think things could have been much worse if I had dug deeper into what lurked in that forgotten cabin's darkness. My next encounter proves that sometimes the greatest danger comes from someone who's been watching you longer than you realize. I lived in my cabin in the Montana wilderness for 8 years before this happened. 30 minutes from the nearest town, completely isolated. In all that time, I never saw or heard another person near my property. On this particular morning, I decided to walk around my land. Knew it well enough to navigate without trails. Just hiking through trees, enjoying the forest, when I stumbled on something immediately disturbing. 300 feet from my back door, I found remnants of a campsite. Burnt pile of ashes from a campfire, flattened area where a tent had been set up. From that spot, I could see my cabin clearly through the trees. Whoever camped here couldn't possibly have thought they were on empty land. They meant to be this close. They were watching me. I searched for more signs, but found nothing else. Just that one spot. How had I never noticed them? I guess after 8 years of solitude, I never thought to look around my own property. The next few days were normal. No signs of campfires or anyone around, even checking windows at night. Saturday evening, I was drinking on my back porch, enjoying the calm forest, when I saw an orange glow flickering through the trees. Same spot as the campsite, definitely a campfire. Against better judgment, I walked over to confront them. Maybe tell them nicely this was my property, even let them finish the night to avoid confrontation. Should have brought a flashlight. When I reached the campsite, it was empty. No one there. Just a fire burning and a tent beside it. Someone had been here minutes ago, probably watching me approach and hiding before I arrived. I looked around frantically, but shadows filled the spaces between trees. If someone was out there, they were invisible in the darkness. After a tense minute, I hurried back toward my cabin. Wanted to get my phone and call police. Even if they ran off, maybe officers could investigate and figure out who this was. But I stopped dead in the middle of the field between woods and cabin. My front door was wide open. The realization hit like ice water. Whoever was camping had entered my cabin while I was at their site. I'd been lured out, tricked. Now I was trapped with nowhere to go. Couldn't call cops or hide in my cabin or run for help. Just stood there in that field, paralyzed and unsure what to do. Nowhere to run. I needed my phone or car keys. I crept closer to the cabin. All lights were off now, completely dark inside. Got right up to the front door and peered in, but saw no movement. "Who's in there?" I called out. Waited several seconds, but heard nothing. My car keys were closer than my phone, right on the end table near the kitchen. phone was in the bedroom on the other side of the cabin. I decided to go for the keys. Building courage, I quickly moved toward the table. As I reached for them, I saw something in the kitchen. A figure hidden in the dark, shadowy corner watching me. I bolted for the front door, hearing heavy footsteps running behind me, slammed the door to buy time, and hurried to my car. The man didn't let up, still sprinting as I turned the engine and started backing out. Had to do a 3-point turn. He caught up just enough to grab one door handle and open it slightly before I pulled away. Escaped by milliseconds before he could get inside. Drove straight to the police station in town. The whole drive, all I could think about was how close that encounter was, and that this man was still at my cabin, able to do anything. Anxiety consumed me while waiting for word from investigating officers. I almost couldn't believe their report when they returned. The person had attempted to burn down my cabin. They found the fireplace raging, loaded with a mountain of wood that had spilled into the living room. Miracle the floors or ceiling didn't catch fire. Officers managed to control it until the fire department could extinguish everything. Only evidence left was ashes in his campsite. Everything else, including the man himself, vanished without a trace. The whole situation escalated to a horrifying level. This person had been stalking me for days or weeks, watching my cabin from the woods. I had no idea who he was or why he was doing any of it. I never stayed at that cabin again. Had movers pack everything and relocated far away. The investigation continued for months, but without new leads, it fizzled out. I'll never know what he planned for me or how bad things could have gotten in those Montana woods. Our next tale takes us to a forgotten, abandoned town in rural Vermont, where a trip to reconnect with the past quickly turns into a terrifying fight for survival. A few years ago, I decided to visit my father's old cabin. He'd passed away recently, and I wanted to see the place he'd built in the woods outside his abandoned hometown in rural Vermont. The town itself no longer existed, just a row of crumbling buildings along a deserted road. I'd never been there before. Dad always said there wasn't much reason to visit once the town died. But after losing him, I felt drawn to this piece of his past. Maybe restoring the cabin would help me process his death and give me some peace. The 2-mile hike from the abandoned gas station where I parked led through dense forest to a small clearing. The cabin still stood, though vines and undergrowth had begun reclaiming it. Inside, the place was a mess. Trash scattered everywhere, a musty smell filling the air. Someone had clearly used it as shelter at some point, though not recently. I cleared a space for my sleeping bag as darkness fell. That first night, I couldn't sleep longer than 30 minutes without waking up with a disturbing, inexplicable feeling. Something felt wrong, though I couldn't identify what. At sunrise, I made coffee on my camp stove and took a walk to clear my head. Following a faint trail uphill, I found an overlook with a view above the tree line. Perfect for watching the sunrise, I thought. But looking out over the forest, I spotted something unexpected. A light glowed in one of the abandoned buildings in town, miles away but clearly visible from this height. As I watched, it suddenly went dark. My first thought was concern for my car, hidden behind the old gas station. Then I wondered who else could possibly be out here in this forgotten place. Probably just urban explorers, I told myself. Still, it seemed like quite a coincidence. I spent the day working on the cabin, cleaning and making basic repairs, but the whole time I felt watched. Every few minutes I'd glance back at the tree line, that eerie sensation creeping over me. The feeling of not being alone, though rationally I knew no one else could be out here. As evening approached, I tested the old wood stove inside. It fired up perfectly, filling the cabin with warmth and the comforting crackle of burning wood. I sat watching the flames, thinking about Dad and this trip, trying to make sense of everything. Then I heard it. Similar crackling sounds, but from outside. Footsteps crunching through leaves and branches, definitely human, approaching the front of the cabin. The wood stove suddenly seemed deafeningly loud, making it hard to listen carefully. A knock at the door. Then a voice calling out a name that stopped my world cold. My father's name. I stood frozen, mind reeling. How could this stranger know Dad? Unable to resist, I moved to the door and asked who was there. The man outside hesitated, clearly realizing from my voice that I wasn't who he expected. He claimed to be an old friend of the man who built this cabin, hoping to see him again. Part of me wanted desperately to open that door, to talk with someone who'd known my father, to hear stories about him. But something held me back. Why was this man here now in this abandoned place? I told him I was Dad's son, and that my father had passed away. The stranger paused, then offered condolences. But something in his voice felt wrong. Not the sadness I'd expect from someone learning of a friend's death. Something calculating. Before I could process this feeling fully, he continued talking, asking me to open up so we could chat by the fire. He mentioned the cold outside, but I detected urgency beneath his slow words, impatience. My instincts screamed that he wasn't being truthful. Sure, he knew Dad's name, but how did I know he was really a friend? As I hesitated, unable to find words, he asked again for me to open the door. This time he knocked harder, his voice growing less kind and more demanding. I backed away from the door, reaching for my hunting knife. The man's facade crumbled completely as he began hitting the door and making threats, abandoning any pretense of being a harmless friend. This continued for what felt like hours, a continuous nightmare of pounding and shouting. Finally, he punched the door in rage, and I heard his footsteps retreating into the woods. I stayed awake all night, knife in hand, waiting. When dawn came with no sign of him, I hurriedly packed and ran back through the forest to my car. Driving non-stop back home, I realized I'd never really understood why Dad left this place. I'd assumed it was because the town was dying, but now I suspected there were darker reasons he'd never brought me here, reasons connected to whoever that man was and whatever he really wanted. Had I let emotion overcome caution and opened that door, I don't think I would have left that town alive.